what is going on, everybody? Hope everybody's enjoying their day so far. We are back for another college basketball bracketology update, and we have finally reached the month of March. So that means we are just weeks away from finding out the field of 68 on Selection Sunday. And we had another great weekend of college basketball with Texas Tech going on the road to Ames, Iowa, to take down the Iowa State Cyclones. We also had Ohio State getting a huge win and an upset victory against Purdue. And we also had Florida really flexing their muscles. The defending champs blew out Arkansas at the O-Dome on Saturday night. So a lot of results changed all of the bracketology updates. So I know that we did last week. We looked at ESPN's. This week, we will be looking at CBS's bracketology here on this Monday, March 2nd, 2026. So this was just updated at around noon local time. So we'll go through the first four. The last four in, the first four out, and then we'll look at the top, number one seeds, and we'll look through 1 through 4 seeds as well. And then we'll get into our latest predictions to see which 4 teams do I have make it to the Final Four, and do I have here on this first Monday in March of who I have as my national champion. Obviously, that's going to change probably by the time that we do get to Selection Sunday. But we will dive into our latest predictions here. But before we get into our predictions, let's go ahead and look at the latest CBS Sports bracketology. First up is the first 4. So looking at the 2 11-seed games, you have TCU and New Mexico. They would face off. And then you have Santa Clara and VCU. And then on the East and the Midwest, you have your 2 16-seed matchups. You would have Long Island facing off against UMBC. UMBC, the Cinderella from a couple of years ago, by defeating, I believe it was either Virginia or Purdue. And then Midwest, in the 16 seeds, you have Howard and Bethune-Cookman. So looking at your last 4 in, you have TCU 19-10 with their net of 45. Santa Clara out of the West Coast Conference 24-7 overall record with a net of 40. The West Coast Conference tournament will be getting underway here in a couple of days. And then New Mexico out of the Mountain West 22-7 with a net of 42. And VCU, VCU is just a team that's always in this conversation. The Rams sit at 22-7 out of the A10 with a net of 47. So right now, all these teams would be projected in the first 4 games in Dayton, Ohio. Your first 4 out, though, this is where you do have a couple of changes, starting with Cal, 20-9 record, net of 64. So more than likely, Cal is going to have to make a deep run or potentially win the ACC conference tournament to even be considered to be a bid. Auburn, with their home loss against Ole Miss, now just hovering over 500. They do have some key games coming up, LSU, and then they have to go on the road to Alabama. So they have to win against LSU. If they lose against the Tigers, then they are just completely out of this tournament without even question. But Auburn, sitting in with a record of 15-14 with a net of 38, is right there on the bubble. I know that they were kind of in the field. They were a 10 seed, 11 seed, but now that they are projected out of this tournament, so we'll see if that changes in the last week of the regular season. San Diego State, the Aztecs, out of the Mountain West, sit at a record 19-9 with a net of 44. And rounding out the first 4 out, you have Seton Hall, the Pirates, out of the Big East with a record of 19-10. Now, Seton Hall, I know that whenever we first looked at this, Seton Hall was right really safely in this. They had a strong start to Big East play, but they kind of fallen off down the stretch here. They have a net of 56. So all 4 of those teams on the outside looking in, and especially with some of these conference tournaments already starting, more likely most of these teams are going to have to go all the way, if not make it at least to the semifinal round to even have a shot of making this field of 68. So that is the updated bubble. Now let's go region by region just to go through the top 4 seeds, and we'll see if there's any changes that I see, in my opinion, from last week to this week. But starting off, no changes at the top spot. The Duke Blue Devils, in action at this moment against NC State. So we'll see if the Blue Devils can get another huge road win. But the Duke Blue Devils still out of the ACC. They have a big-time test coming up this weekend against North Carolina. They get that at home. Duke would be the number 1 overall seed in the East region. Rounding out the top 4 seeds in the East region, you have Illinois being the 2 seed, Iowa State the 3 seed, the Cyclones, like I mentioned at the top here. Iowa State falling to Texas Tech at home. But this is still a very good team out of the Big 12. Kansas, we do see another Big 12 team in the East region. They round out the top 4 seeds. Looks like Iowa is still firmly a number 8 seed. Missouri has moved up off of the 10 line now onto the 9 line. So that's a couple of changes there. St. John's still at the 5. Miami still, I think Miami is actually moving up. I know that we last looked at this, they were 8 seed. Looks like they are now a 7 seed. UCF still infirm of a 10 seed, even with their loss to Baylor. The Knights still have a really good resume there out of the Big 12. Kentucky remaining at the 6 seed. Huge win for the Wildcats this past weekend, dominating Vanderbilt at home in Rupp Arena. So Kentucky holding firm there at the 6th seed in the East region. Now going on to the Midwest, really no changes here outside of all these number 1 seeds. Michigan still holds the number 2 overall number 1 seed. So the Wolverines looking, they already clinched the regular season conference championship. So we'll see how they do in their conference tournament here next week. But Utah State firmly in at the 9. Texas actually moves up. I know that Texas was one of those last 4 teams in. Huge win on the road against Texas A&M. So the Longhorns will get that 8-9 matchup there. Looking at the rest of the top 4 seeds, Houston out of the Big 12 still the number 2 seed. Nebraska still holding firm at the 3 seed, and Virginia still the same at the 4 seed. Same with Arkansas. Arkansas probably would have had a huge opportunity with a win against Florida. However, with the loss, Arkansas still at the number 5 seed. Really a couple of changes I do see here. Miami of Ohio now down to a 12 seed. I know that in the recent bracketology that we looked at, they've been 11 seed. Looks like, Jared Palm has moved them to the 12 seed. Villanova is still firmly as a 7. SMU actually moved down a seed line. They were number 9 seed projection, but SMU, tough loss for them this past weekend. So the Mustangs, we do see them moving on down. But outside of that, really no changes that I see in the Midwest. Going on to the West, this is your number 3 overall 1 seed, Arizona. The Wildcats have a huge opportunity tonight to get a huge victory to really just bolster up this resume, to really lock up the number 1 seed. The number 2 seed in the West region, we do see Michigan State. Michigan State now moving up. I know that they were projected 3 seed, but Michigan State continues to pile up some wins, especially in Big Ten play. So the Spartans now projected number 2 seed. We'll see how their path really shapes out here once we look at the full bracket here in just a couple of moments. Alabama moves up from the 4 to a 3 seed. The Crimson Tide got a huge win in Knoxville against Tennessee. Alabama, like I mentioned, does have some tough tests this week, especially at home against Auburn. Gonzaga still at number 4 seed, even with the loss against St. Mary's. They'll probably have another crack at the Gales in the West Coast Conference Championship if things go to really chalk there. Tennessee still remains the same at number 5 seed. Wisconsin remains the same at the 6 seed. And looking at the 7 seed, BYU actually moves down from the 6 to the 7. BYU, a tough loss this past weekend in Big 12 play. And then Clemson, Ohio State. Ohio State, like I mentioned at the top, did get a huge victory against Purdue. Clemson was able to remain at the 8 seed. Both of these teams, I mean, they've been a roller coaster ride this season. Really no other changes I see out of that. Texas A&M continues to fall off with their continued losses as they are now in a projected 11 seed. So right now the Aggies are safe, but if they continue to lose then they may be in one of those first 4 games in Dayton. So now let's move on now to the final 1 seed in the South. We do have the UConn Huskies. I really don't see this changing. If maybe Florida is about the only team that I could see jumping the Huskies at this point, but UConn has really been dominant in Big East play. They blew out St. John's. So the Huskies looking really strong as of late. Florida moving off of the 3 line now into projected 2 seed. That's no surprise. Florida looking like one of the more dangerous teams in all of college basketball so far. Purdue actually drops from the 2 seed to a 3 seed, especially with that road loss on Sunday against the Buckeyes. So Purdue trending in the wrong direction. Texas Tech, probably you could argue that they had the best resume in college basketball, maybe Michigan as well. But Texas Tech, a huge win for them against Iowa State on the road. Red Raiders, even without JT Toppin, is undefeated so far. Vandy continues to fall from the 4 to the 5 line. especially with that road loss in Rupp against Kentucky. St. Mary's still trending in the right direction at the 7th seed, especially with that home win against Gonzaga. NC State and Georgia, those are two teams that have really been locked on that 8-9 line. And then looking at the 10 seed, St. Louis has been firmly a 10 seed. Looks like South Florida has actually moved up. I know that in the last couple of bracketology updates we looked at, the Bulls have been a projected 12 seed. So we will see if South Florida is the American representative. I know that Tulsa in the last couple of bracketologies was also projected to be in here, but South Florida is a projected 11 seed, and Louisville is the 6th seed. So I believe that is it. Looking at the bracket index, this is how all these teams shape up. As you see, the 1 seeds their next game. Duke right now is playing NC State. Michigan's got a road test against Iowa. UConn goes on the road to Marquette, and Arizona's got a big one tonight against Iowa State. Your 2 seeds, Illinois versus Oregon, Houston versus Baylor, Florida versus Mississippi State, Michigan State versus Rutgers. We'll see if we do have any upsets, but most of these teams aren't that great this season, let's be honest with you. So with that, let's go ahead, as we always do here. We're going to go ahead and pull up the full bracket here. We use pdffiller.com if you want to do something similar to this at home just to see, just look at the latest bracketology. We'll do our latest predictions to see who do we have advancing on to the Final Four and ultimately being the national champion of this 2025-2026 college basketball season. So let me go ahead and pull up the bracket, and we will get right into going region by region, starting off at the top left, as we do see the Duke Blue Devils being the #1 overall seed in this field. And that's really been not a change here. I don't know why Duke's not showing up, so let me go ahead and put Duke there really quickly. But let's go ahead and start off with these predictions. Starting off with our first matchup that we do see is the 1 versus 16 in the East region. We have Duke facing off against the winner of Long Island and UMBC. I would have UMBC taking down the Sharks of Long Island, but it's not going to matter. Duke is going to be way too much for whoever wins that 16-seed matchup. So I will go with the Duke Blue Devils moving on to the second round here. So now let's move on to our first of 4 8-9 matchups that we have here in this tournament bracket. We have Iowa facing off against Missouri. Now, both of these teams turning in the right direction. Missouri got a huge win in the midweek against Tennessee, and Iowa is continuing to really be a thorn in some side to some of these Big Ten teams. But I'm going to go with the 9/8 upset, if you want to call it an upset here. But I'm going to go with Missouri to take down Iowa in this matchup. Now we go to our 5 versus 12 matchup, St. John's versus Yale. Yale's always a dominant force out of the Ivy League, and they've had a couple of upsets, go back a couple of years ago when they took down Auburn. But I just don't see it here. The Johnnies, outside of that UConn loss, is really playing well. Rick Pitino's got this squad playing their best brand of basketball at the right time there. So now let's move on to our first 4-13 matchup. We have Kansas and Liberty. I just don't really see any troubles for the Kansas Jayhawks. I know that Kansas can be a roller coaster ride at times this season, but I will go with Kansas moving on past the Flames of Liberty. Then we have our first Kentucky versus the 11 seed matchup of TCU New Mexico. I will go with TCU winning that game, but ultimately I will go with Kentucky. Kentucky has a lot of talent on this basketball team, as they always do. They spend a lot of money in the transfer portal. Probably not the season that they hoped for. They probably would have been in like the top 3 seeds, but still a 6 seed for Kentucky. So I will have Kentucky moving on there. Now we have Iowa State facing off against Navy. Navy, the projected 14 seed in this field. But I just think that the Cyclones are going to be a little bit too much for the midshipmen there. So give me Iowa State. Then we have Miami and UCF in the 7 and the 10. Give me another slight upset here. I'm going to go with the Knights of Central Florida. They've just shown more to me overall this season than Miami has. So give me the Knights there. Like I mentioned in previous ones, I just think that the Big 12 is going to flex their muscle come tournament time. Then we have Illinois facing off against Central Arkansas in the 2 versus 15 matchup. I'm going to go with no upset here. I'm going to have the Fighting Illini fighting on to live another round there. So give me Illinois. Now let's continue on here in the East region as we go to the second round matchups. We had Duke in number 9 seed Missouri. Once again, don't see an upset here. I will go with the Duke Blue Devils pulling off that win against Missouri. Then we have 5 versus the 4, St. John's and Kansas. Continue to go with the chalk here. Go with the Jayhawks to move on there. Then we have Kentucky and Iowa State. Now, this would be a real solid matchup between Kentucky and Iowa State. But I just think that Iowa State's defense is going to have a lot of answers, especially for Kentucky's guard. So give me Iowa State to move on there. Then we have UCF in Illinois, potential upset. Like UCF is a dangerous team. I know, like I mentioned, they really had a bad loss against Baylor. But I'm going to go with Illinois nonetheless, though. I think that this would be a great matchup. I am going to go with Illinois moving on there. Then we have Duke versus Kansas setting up a blue blood matchup here in the Sweet 16. This would be a lot of firepower on both sides, but I'm just going to go with Duke. They have one of the best players in the country, if not the best player in the country, Cam Boozer. So I will go with the Blue Devils moving on to the Elite Eight. Then we have Iowa State in Illinois. Give me another slight upset here. I'm going to go with the Cyclones to move all the way to the Elite Eight and pull this one off against the 2 seed Illinois. Then we have Duke in Iowa State. Going to have the number 1 overall seed advancing all the way to the Final Four. I think that this path is very favorable. You know, they would have to face off against Kansas and Iowa State, 2 really good basketball teams. But I just think that this Duke team is, I mean, they're going to have to beat themselves, to be honest with you, if they do want to get knocked out of this tournament. So I will go with the Blue Devils being one of our first representatives in the Final Four. Now let's move on to the top right portion of the bracket, as we do see the Michigan Wolverines facing off against Howard and Bethune-Cookman. Give me Bethune-Cookman to win that matchup against Howard, but I just don't really see a 16 seed winning this year, though I always want it to happen. But I'm going to go with Michigan. Michigan. You just look at their resume. They have a lot of dominant wins. I know that they ended up losing that game in Washington, D.C. just a couple of weeks ago against Duke. They did lose their backup point guard to the season for torn ACL. I just think that this Michigan team is still elite. Now let's go on to Utah State and Texas. I will go with Utah State winning that one, even with Texas winning against Texas A&M. I mean, that team, you just can't figure them out every season, so I will go with Utah State. Then we have Arkansas and Miami of Ohio. Miami of Ohio still the lone unbeaten team. However, they just haven't really played as well these past couple of weeks. Like, I mean, they barely escaped against a very bad Western Michigan team on the road. So even I know that Arkansas did get blown out by Florida, but a lot of teams are getting blown out. This Arkansas team still is filled with a lot of talent. So I will go with Arkansas taking down the lone unbeaten in all of college basketball and the Red Hawks. So give me that one. Then we have Virginia and UNC Wilmington in the 4 and the 13. It's going to be my first upset that I'm going to pull here. UNC Wilmington is a very dangerous number 13 seed. And Virginia, I don't know, there's something about them every year. It's the same thing with Purdue. They have really talented defense, but come tournament time, like Virginia or Purdue, they're either going to lose in the first round or win the national championship. There's really no in between with both of those teams. But I'm going to go with UNC Wilmington. There's always a 13 or a 12 upset, so I'm going to pull the trigger on that one. Then we have North Carolina facing off against the winner of Santa Clara and VCU. Give me Santa Clara and give me actually Santa Clara to pull this one out. You know, there's always a first 4 team making a run. So let's have Santa Clara. I mean, the West Coast Conference, I know it's top heavy. You got Gonzaga, you have St. Mary's, you got Santa Clara. But I just think that North Carolina, I mean, they're another team that just like a roller coaster ride. They can beat anybody, they can lose to anybody. So give me Santa Clara pulling that one out. Then we have Nebraska and North Dakota State. Give me the Cornhuskers to win that one. I know that Nebraska has been one of the fan favorites in all this college basketball team, so I will go with Nebraska there. Then we have Villanova in SMU. I will go with Villanova in this one. Like I mentioned, I mean, SMU, this is a team that I cannot trust whatsoever, so give me Villanova. Then we have Houston and Wright State. Maybe this was baseball. We'll go Wright State. However, on the court, I will go with the Cougars there. I mean, Houston every single year feels like they are pretty much a guarantee to make at least a deep run. So I will go with the Cougs moving on there. Let's go on now to our second round matchups. The first one that we have is Michigan facing off against Utah State. Don't see an 8-1 upset here. I will go with Michigan. And then we have the 5 seed Arkansas facing off against the 13 seed UNC Wilmington. Would like to have the Cinderella story moving on, but I just think that Arkansas is a very talented team, so I will go with Arkansas there. Then we have Santa Clara and Nebraska. This would be a phenomenal matchup if we were to get this. And like I mentioned, there's always an 11 seed making a run. Let's have Santa Clara making a little Cinderella story there. So Santa Clara moves on there to the Sweet 16. So that's our first double digit, making it all the way there. Then we have Villanova and Houston. I just don't think that Houston's going to have any problems if they do face off against Villanova. So give me Houston to advance to the next round in the Sweet 16. So then we have Michigan and Arkansas. I know in the last bracketology, I did have Arkansas going on a little bit of a run. I just don't like this matchup, however, for the Razorbacks. So give me Michigan to win this one. Then we have Santa Clara, really the Cinderella story of this tournament so far, facing off against Houston. I will have Houston, though, winning this one. So once again, a pretty chalky region as the 1 and the 2 seeds. But if you look at last year's tournament, I mean, we had all number 1 seeds making it to the Final Four. So I wouldn't put it past the tournament really going down like this once again. But Michigan and Houston, really 2 balanced teams. But I'm going to go with Houston in this one. I definitely think that Michigan losing their backup point guard is definitely going to hurt them. That was a guy he's probably like the best backup point guard in all of college basketball. So it's going to ding them a little bit. Like I mentioned, Houston, you got to just trust them in every single tournament. They're always going to make a deep run. So I think that Houston and Kelvin Sampson squad is going to make it back to the Final Four in back-to-back seasons. So we have our first non-1 seed making an appearance in the Final Four in the form of Houston. Now let's move on to Arizona's region, as we have Arizona and Tennessee State. Once again, do not see a 16 seed upset here. Then we have Clemson and Ohio State. Give me Ohio State to pull off this 9/8 upset there, if you do want to call an upset like I mentioned. So I will go with Ohio State in the 8-9 game there as I try to – golly, what is going on here? Okay, all right, come on. All right, let's see. Ohio State, there we go. All right, now let's move on to the 5 versus the 12. Tennessee and High Point. Now, High Point, like I mentioned, if you want to talk about some dangerous 12 seeds, Belmont and High Point, to me, are the top 2. Tennessee hasn't really been playing that great down the stretch either, to be honest with you. But I will trust the Vols in this matchup, so give me Rocky Top to move on there. Here we have Gonzaga and Utah Valley in this, West Coast battle, but I will go with Gonzaga to move on there. So then we have Wisconsin facing off against Texas A&M. I mean, Texas A&M, if you want to talk about starting off hot and really just cooling off, that's what the Aggies have been. So I am going to go with Wisconsin this one. So give me that in the 6 versus 11. Then we have Alabama facing off against UC Irvine in the 3 and the 14. I will go with Alabama moving on there. So give me the Crimson Tide to continue their run. Then we have BYU in UCLA. Give me an upset here. I'm going to go with UCLA in this 10 versus 7 seed. This would be a high-scoring game. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if the winner gets to like 90 because these are 2 really talented offenses, but I will go the Bruins, pulling off that upset there. Then we have Michigan State in Portland State. I'm going to go with Michigan State. Like I mentioned, trust Tom Izzo once it comes to the month of March. So give me the Spartans to move on there. So now let's move on to Arizona and Ohio State. Once again, I just do not see an upside. I just don't think that these 8-9s are really going to pose any threats to these 1 seeds. So give me Arizona to move on there. Tennessee and Gonzaga, both teams that could both beat anybody, lose it to anybody. But I will go with Tennessee to move on there. I'm probably going to regret this because every single year I try to move Tennessee to the Final Four, and they always crap the bed before they even get there. And then we have Wisconsin versus Alabama. We did see this on the gridiron this year, and it was all Alabama. I think it's going to be the same. I think that if they get hot from beyond the arc, it's going to be pretty much over for the Badgers. And then we have an all Big Ten matchup in the second round as number 10 seed UCLA faces off against Michigan State. I will go with Tom Izzo and the Spartans to move on there. This is a very dangerous team. They are really starting to put it together at the right time. Then we have Arizona and Tennessee. Like I mentioned, Tennessee is not a team that I just do not see going far this year, so give me Arizona. Alabama and Michigan State. This would be a really good matchup. But once again, I'm going to go with the chalk. I'm going to go with Michigan State moving on. And I'm going to have another 1 seed, another Big 12 team making it all the way to the Final Four, as I will have Arizona make it out. I know that Arizona, people like to give crap for them. They always never make it, it seems like, to the Final Four, especially with the talent they had the last couple of seasons. But it feels like this Arizona team is different from years past. So give me Arizona to make it to the Final Four this season. All right, we have one more region to look at. We have UConn's region. Face it off against Merrimack. Like I mentioned, I just do not see a 16-seed upset this season with UConn winning there. Then we have NC State and Georgia. I mean, just pick a team, I guess, at this point to win this one. I mean, I'm not really a fan of both teams, but I will go with NC State pulling that one off. And then we have Vanderbilt and Belmont. Like I mentioned last week's bracketology, I just cannot trust Vandy right now. They start out their season very well, but I'm going to go with Belmont on this one. Like I mentioned, there's going to be at least one or two upsets featuring the 12 or 13 seeds. So give me Belmont to pull that upset off. Then we have Texas Tech facing off against Stephen F. Austin. Now, Stephen F. Austin out of the Southland, that's a team to watch. However, this is a very bad matchup going up against Texas Tech, so I will go with the Red Raiders there. Then we have Louisville facing off against South Florida. I will go with Louisville. South Florida is a very talented team, but I will go with the Cards to advance on there. Then we have Purdue facing off against East Tennessee State. I will go with Purdue moving on to the next round there. Then we have St. Mary's in St. Louis. Once again, really good matchup between the Gales and the Billikens, but I will go with St. Mary's in this one. I mean, St. Mary's, this is just a team that's always in the dance. Like, they either could go to the Sweet 16 or be an early bounce. St. Louis, everybody's talking about, Miami of Ohio obviously being undefeated, but St. Louis, probably the next best story in all of college basketball this season in the mid-majors. Then we have Florida and Troy. How can you not pick against the Gators right now? One of the hottest teams in all of college basketball so far. So give me the Gators to move on there. Then we have UConn facing off against NC State. I mean, NC State's one of those teams that can really pull off an upset. Out of the 8 versus the 9s that I see, I would probably give the 9 to NC State. But UConn, I think that they are going to survive and advance here. So give me UConn there. Belmont and Texas Tech, I really have just going into this, I just think that Texas Tech's going to be way too much in this matchup. I've let it pull the Cinderella story, but Texas Tech is always one of those teams that I always have going far in this tournament. The way that they've been playing, especially without JT Toppin, this might be a team that can make it all the way back to the Final Four once again. Then we have Louisville and Purdue. I'm going to give a 6-3 upset. Once again, like I mentioned, Purdue is one of those teams come tournament time that I just cannot trust whatsoever. So give me Louisville. I mean, Purdue has a ton of talent. They're just losing the teams that they really shouldn't. So I will go with Louisville. I know that Louisville at times got blown out this season, but I will go with the Cards advancing on there. Then we have St. Mary's in Florida. Once again, I am going to be riding with the Gators once again in this March Madness, especially the way that they've been playing. So give me Florida. So, I mean, looking at it, this is very similar to the last year. We had UConn, Texas Tech, and Florida. Obviously, the seedings were changed, but you do have 3 out of 4 teams in this same region. UConn and Texas Tech, I just don't think that we get all number 4 1 seeds this year yet again. So let's go with an upset. I'm going to go with the Red Raiders pulling off our first, I guess if you want to call it, major upset of this predictions, as I have our first number 1 seed not advancing on to the Elite Eight here. So give me Texas Tech. Then we have Louisville and number 2, Florida. I will go with Florida advancing on and setting up a rematch of last year's Elite Eight between the Red Raiders and the Gators. So we have Texas Tech and Florida. Man, these are both teams that I really love. I hate that they're both if they were on completely opposite sides, I would definitely take both of these teams to make it to the Final Four. However, since they are matchup, I will go with the Gators winning this one yet again against Texas Tech. So pretty chalky Final Four, but I just think that's how this year is going to be. We do have 2 number 1 seeds with Duke and Arizona, and 2 seeds with Houston and Florida making it all the way to the Final Four. So we have 1 SEC, 1 ACC, and 2 Big 12. So first up, we have Duke versus Florida in our first Final Four matchup. And I think that the Gators are going to continue on this magical run yet again. So give me the Gators to take down Duke in this first matchup. Then we have Houston and Arizona. I think we get Florida and Arizona in the national championship. So can Florida be the first team probably since their back-to-back run yet? I believe it was 06 and 07 that they did it. So we'll see if the Gators can go back-to-back. Arizona in the national championship. But the way that the Gators have been playing, I mean, why not pick them yet again to win the national championship? So I'm just going to ride with the momentum that Florida has had. So I'm going to go with Florida winning the national championship and going back-to-back. So I know that my national champion has changed. I went from Michigan Duke to Florida. Like I mentioned, the next couple of weeks, it's definitely going to be changing as we get more college basketball unfolding. And once tournament time, the real bracket comes out. I mean, obviously, I'm going to try to get some more upsets here just to be fun with it, like I always try to do. But I just think that we're going to get a lot of 1 seeds, 2 seeds. Maybe we do get a 3 or 4 seed in between there. But right now, at this moment, I will have the Florida Gators cutting down the nets yet again come early April. So let me know who you have making it to the Final Four as we sit here on Monday, March 2nd. Who do you have also cutting down the nets? So let me know your picks down in the comments. We'll be back for our next college basketball bracketology update next week. We'll probably have at least 2 of these. Some more. I'll try to do more as we get closer to Selection Sunday, just to get some more predictions and just to get, kind of a gist of what all these other bracketology experts are saying, especially on CBS and ESPN. So we'll be back next week. Keep it up on the channel. We'll have more college basketball content coming out, especially with the conference tournaments. And then I'll be dropping an SEC women's tournament prediction preview that will be coming Tuesday morning. So definitely stay tuned to that. And I appreciate everybody for tuning in. Enjoy the rest of your night, and I'll catch you all next time. So long for now.